Hello and a very warm welcome to this new debate organized by the Centre Maurits Capiter and the Welsh Nationalism Foundation. Today we would like to start a legal discussion, but not a legal discussion about an abstract idea, but actually about something that has more consequences than you might actually presume. Think about it. Is the political autonomy enjoyed by stateless nations such as Catalonia or Scotland or Wales or Flanders protected legally, or could it be scrapped completely? Is a referendum on independence legal everywhere? And what happens after this kind of referendums? To discuss all these issues, we've invited today two very interesting guests. In my left, I have Josep Maria Reniu. He is the Director of the Political Science Studies at the Universitat of Barcelona, also Director of the Observatory of Coalition Governments, and member of the Advisory Council on the National Transition in Catalonia. Welcome, thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
And on my right I have Huw Evans. He's law lecturer at the Cardiff Metropolitan University, an expert on Welsh Law and Devolution, and he also works for the Welsh Nationalism Foundation. Welcome, thank you for being here again.
Thank you, welcome to you as well.
First I'd like to start with the easy question, if I may. Let's start with you, Mr. Evans. Which is the legal position for autonomy in Wales?
The legal position, as far as Welsh devolution is concerned, is quite straightforward. The National Assembly for Wales, which establishes devolution in Wales, was created by the Government of Wales Act 1998. That was an act passed by the UK Parliament. There are constitutional arrangements as such in the UK that if an act is passed, Parliament can do what it likes. So there are no restrictions, no guarantees. The Government of Wales Act could be revoked tomorrow and the National Assembly for Wales could be abolished. It's as simple as that. So at one level the Constitution is very flexible, but there are no guarantees either. So we could head towards dependence, we could head towards abolition. There are no legal restrictions as far as the UK Constitution is concerned.
What about the Catalan case?
Well, in the Catalan case, as well as in the other nationalities and autonomous communities in Spain, like Galicia or the Basque country, all of them are regulated by statutes of autonomy. Those documents, legally speaking, are just organic laws, a kind of law in the Spanish system, that must be approved by the Spanish Parliament. That's to say, major political parties in Spain can decide on those documents, depending on the correlation of political forces among national government and subnational governments. The simplest way to understand our political autonomy is to imagine a scenario where nominally we do have self-governance, but in practice the central government holds all the critical researches, both economic and legal researches, that are critical for our day-by-day government. So it's difficult to understand an autonomy without the full command of all researches. So finally we are becoming just more political managers rather than effective political decisions.
Mm-hmm. Following on this argument, the existing constitutional arrangements in Spain make it easier or more difficult for a Catalan government to go ahead with its own policies in education, in language, and all these kind of issues?
That's really a very good question. In my opinion, the problem arises when the interpretation of the Constitution by the Spanish Constitutional Court have been so restrictive in too many ways. The most important moment was in the sentence of 2010 about our new Statute of Autonomy in 2006, not only for drafting essentially a political statement instead of a legal statement, but especially for the legal constraints over the political development of the Catalan autonomy. That's to say, we propose, from Catalonia, we propose a new way to develop our political autonomy in a dialogue with the state, and the response was the entire limitation of our self-government and their refusal to any possibility of a flexible and modern interpretation of the constitutional text. So now, in our effort to carry on a referendum on the independence of Catalonia, the answer we get is just the same. The political constitution, the constitution in Spain doesn't allow it. Even they threaten us with the suspension of our political autonomy. So the situation is rather critical in few words.
He was mentioned the suspension of the autonomy. You said before Wales could get the autonomy suspended, but which is the scenario in Westminster?
In Westminster, it's remarkably straightforward as compared to the Catalonian context. If I can relate it initially to Scotland, because Scotland is, within the UK is the more advanced case of devolution. The Scottish Nationalist Party is the majority party in the Scottish Parliament. They wish to hold a referendum in Scotland regarding independence. It was agreed at UK level with the Scottish government that the Scottish government did not have the power to hold that referendum. But unlike in Spain, Catalonia, the UK government agreed to give the Scottish Parliament that power. So that power was transferred, and there is going to be a referendum in October of next year concerning the question of whether Scotland should have independence or not. There is a joint agreement which was arrived at I think the end of last year in Edinburgh between the Scottish government and the UK government, in which it was agreed that they would both work in the best interests and in good faith of the respective peoples, and that if there was a positive vote in terms of a vote for independence, then both governments would then enter into negotiations to agree terms for that position. So relating it back to a Welsh context, I would imagine if the position in Wales developed in devolution in autonomous terms as it has in Scotland, then there would be a similar scenario as far as Wales was concerned. So there are no barriers there, but again there are no guarantees as well. But the position is a lot more straightforward.
We were mentioning here the issue of independence, which is quite an important one nowadays in some of these stateless nations in Europe. Which would you say are the legal challenges for independence in the case of Catalonia, for example, domestically, but also in the context of the European Union?
Well, basically, in the Catalan case, domestically we are facing the difficulties of a rigid, hidebound legal framework. The constitutional framework in Spain is just so constraining all possibilities to carry on a legal consultation, a legal referenda, which is just our central aim at the moment. After more than 30 years of the recovery or of democracy in Spain, unfortunately, it seems that there's not a clear, adaptable democratic culture to allow our people to decide. We are just asking a simple argument, that is, we want to decide, just in a democratic way. The unique answer to our demands is always the same. The Constitution doesn't allow your aim to decide. Look, all the legal texts, all the constitutions are designed, the main reason is to resolve problems, not to create them. And actually, I think in Spain we are facing just this Gordian problem. We cannot go forward asking democratically to our citizens what do they want, but we cannot also go to the European scenario, because legally Catalonia has no power at all to present themselves as a state, because we are not a state. So basically the problems are two-sided. In one hand, in Spain we have no possibility to carry on a legal consultation. On the other side, on the European context, we have no power at all to ask for support.
What could you add to this?
Well, I've already stated the UK position, and in one sense it's legally straightforward. I mean, it's not simple, but it's clear. If the Scottish people voted for independence, then there is a legal pathway for that independence to be established. The problem then is the next step. What is the status of Scotland in terms of its place in the European Union, its place in terms of signatories to other treaties? There is an argument, certainly, that it should take its place as part of the European Union automatically in principle, and then, but counter-arguments are also being put in place, saying that Scotland should, if it were to gain independence, would be a new state and would not be entitled to independence. So there are very clear arguments on both sides of the fence, and the treaties are silent on the issue about a member state or a new state emanating from an existing member state. I mean, Commission President Barroso said if part of the territory of a member state would cease to be part of that state, the treaties would no longer apply to that territory. So therefore, that's a simplistic position that's been adopted, and that is the position that's also been put out, suggested by UK government legal advisors, that Scotland would have to apply for membership. And that is being used very much as a form of negative campaigning to make people afraid of the consequences of voting for independence. And you can see that tactic very much in play. There is, of course, a contrary argument, because the treaties are established, the European Union treaties were established in the aftermath of the Second World War. Article 2 of the treaty talks about upholding values such as human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, human rights. European citizens are given, member state citizens are given European citizenship, so there are individual rights. To suggest that Scotland, if it becomes independent, would not satisfy the criteria for membership is a non-starter. Clearly, it would do. To suggest then that its individual citizens would lose their rights as individual citizens, as European citizens, flies in the face of the whole ethos of the EU. So there is this counter-argument, and also there is a practical context, because if Scotland, let's say, votes for independence, it doesn't obtain independence that day. There's going to be a substantial lead-in time where there will be the terms of that negotiation of that independence are negotiated in terms of splitting assets and liabilities, etc., etc. During that period, one would expect that there would be continuing parallel negotiations with the EU as far as continued membership is concerned. So, in effect, the date. So Scotland would never cease to be. The day it became an independent nation would be the day it also became a continuing member of the EU. I would argue. There's also the argument about what is the position if the argument is that Scotland has to reapply. What about the remainder of the UK state? You could argue it as the same as far as that is concerned. So I would suggest that the better argument is that Scotland, as a democratic society, would continue to be a member of the European Union, and that would apply as well to a Catalan nation or to a Welsh nation that actually acquired that particular status. So there are some interesting times ahead.
Very interesting indeed. We are in the European Parliament, we are in Brussels. You were mentioning how Catalonia, for example, has not much legal protection outside of Spain in a way. Do you think that actually the EU legal framework then does not represent enough stateless nations, such as the one we were mentioning?
Yeah, I do agree, absolutely. I think we have to face a problem that it's on the defining the European Union. The European Union was created by states, and if you're not a state legally, it appears those problems that are the same arguments, nonsense arguments that are used in Spain against the possibility of Catalonia becoming independent. So a part of the point that any member state could organize internally the presence of subnational governments or national politics within the decision-making process, I think we have to rethink the designing of our Europe in order to open spaces, initially little spaces, where those governments, those national governments, could have voice and even could decide on the political, very specific politics. For example, when we are dealing with tourism, for example, in Catalonia, we have some ideas to give. We have some interest to defend. We have some policies to promote. So I think if we want to, the European Union being with a large life and being a strength over the years, we need to open the decision-making process not only to the member states, not only to the state as known in the 29th century, but also to the new realities like Flanders, like Euskadi, Galicia, Catalonia, Wales, and so on.
Would you agree on this?
I would agree. I mean, and I think the European Union has been created by member states, but for what reason? It's for the benefit of its citizens, and its citizens have rights and interests, and its citizens aren't just members of member states. Its citizens are members of cultural groupings, economic groupings, as you've just talked in terms of the Catalan tourist industry, for example. You know, there is the Welsh language, there is the Catalan language. It's a pluralistic society, and the decision-making process needs to reflect that particular quality of the peoples of the Union for it to succeed. I mean, it's noticeable how people queue up to join the European Union because they think their individual identities will be protected. And you know, and far from being a breaker of the Union, a movement towards autonomy within certain regions is actually, in my view, strengthening the Union, because it actually, there is some adjustment, there is some reflection of there is self-determination within that more general, that more complete framework.
Well, that's a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much to you both for participating in this debate organized by the Centre Mauritsky Peters and the Welsh Nationalism Foundation. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Thank you very much and goodbye.